So it's been a great day of terrific science here, and I want to give a big thank you to LabCentral to running such a wonderful symposium. I'm Karen Harris from the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, and I am the CFO and the head of mission-related investing. And for those of you who don't know about ADDF, we are a nonprofit venture philanthropy, which means that instead of giving out grants, we invest in biotech companies and we do royalty deals with academia. And our mission, as you probably understand from the name, is to accelerate the discovery and development of drugs to cure, treat, and prevent Alzheimer's. So I'm happy to say that we've had great science and we've seen a lot of developments in this year. So in 2024, we have 2 new monoclonal antibodies that are really disease-altering antibodies. And though we have a ways to go, this has really been a pivotal year with blood biomarkers and digital biomarkers. But great science isn't really enough to get the drugs into the hands of patients. For that, we need great execution and robust financing. And so for today, I'm going to try, for those who are academics and who are trying to think of spinning out a company, or maybe some of you are in the clinic and looking to do an IPO, I'd like for you, after this session, to better understand what are the sources of funding that are available to you and how best to get at them. So let me turn it over to my expert panel of venture capitalists here to introduce themselves and perhaps say something about your VC and what you focus on.
Sounds great. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this panel. My name is Hui Yuan. I'm a senior associate on the investment team of Dementia Discovery Fund. I'm trained as a scientist, started my career doing research in immunology, did a lot of work on autoimmune and immuno-oncology, but ultimately got fascinated about how the nervous system crosstalk with the immune system and how we can leverage a lot of learnings we have from precision medicine in oncology to use that to solve really the biggest unmet medical need in neurodegeneration. So Dementia Discovery Fund is a venture capital fund. The name is very close to ADDF, but the way we operate differently is we act pretty much like a very conventional institutional investor. We are currently investing out of fund that we currently manage about 500 million, and we are a fund strategy that is managed by SV Health investors. We build on the long track record of SV of successfully investing in companies that have contributed to more than 20 FDA-approved drugs. And at ADDF, we have gathered a specialty team of people with VC expertise, BD expertise. We also have a great network of venture partners who help us source, evaluate, and also support the operation of our companies. So currently, half of our portfolio are companies that are created by DDF, which means we are participating in the process of licensing an IP from academia or from a biotech pharma company, and we are involved in helping build the team and shaping the strategy of the company to help them operate to success. And the other half of the portfolio are investments into existing companies. We tend to invest early. The seed and Series A stage is usually our sweet spot, but in the current market, as the valuation for later stage deals also becomes more reasonable, we also try to capture opportunities for those stage as well.
So I'm Ricardo Dolmetsch. I'm a partner at Curie Bio. And Curie is different from other VCs in at least 3 ways. The first is we're seed investors, And we take all-comer applications. So you can go to our website and you can submit your idea, and we will evaluate your idea. So that's one. Two, we have half of the company is really an operating company. So when people show up with ideas, we provide whatever's missing. So if you need chemists, we provide chemists. If you need biologics experts, we provide biologics experts. If you need operators, we provide operators. We usually form a pod around whatever company's there to get it to the next inflection point, which in our case is usually a Series A. And then, of course, we provide funding. So we have a number of funds, and we usually write checks on the order of about $10 million. And maybe the final way in which we're different is we usually, so the kind of motto of the company is free the founders. And what that really means is that the idea is to help founders retain as much value as possible. And so we usually buy 50% or less of the company, and then we help people build to a point where they have more value so that when they engage with Series A investors, they do better. That's kind of the principle. So that's Curie.
So I'm Stacy Weniger. I'm with F Prime Capital Partners, neuroscientist by training. So I've always been in neuroscience. F Prime Capital is traditional venture capital, disease agnostic. We actually have a lot of different funds under the F Prime umbrella. But in the healthcare biotech funds, we're on our 8th fund, several billion under management at this point. I basically do all things neuro and have built a lot of companies in the space. So really, we like to go really early, work with academics, spin out companies, build them, and build them into kind of the next great things. So, like I said, F Prime's disease agnostic. Typically, we're very active investors, and seed Series A is probably our sweet spot, although we do come in on some Series Bs.
So we've had a pretty difficult financing environment for the past 3 years. And I was wondering what your expectations are for 2025. Maybe we'll start with Ricardo.
It's a very difficult question, especially now. I think it can hardly get harder. I mean, it has been kind of the nuclear winter of fundraising. I can tell you that, and I know this not just because I sit on the funding side. I also spent this last year on the trying to raise money side of it. I am also the CEO of an addiction company, and that was unbelievably hard. And we just finally managed to raise the Series B. But I can tell you that we nailed the failure story. That is to say, we got rejected by about 90 VCs before we got the 5 people who were interested in investing. So I don't think it can get a lot harder. Having said that, people do have money. They have raised lots of funds. And so I think conceptually there is enthusiasm, and there are exits to be had because big pharma and big biotech and now the IPO market is sort of open. So, I mean, I hope it'll get better, but I don't really know.
Stacy, do you have any thoughts on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of money out there for investing in companies. There, a lot of funds have raised huge amounts of money. So there's definitely the capital there. I think where I've seen companies struggle as much as anything is companies that raised in the heyday, raised at too high valuations, and have tired syndicates. And so, there was really this idea that you could just keep having the valuation go up and up and up, and new investors would come in, and it would be great. And those new investors were not willing to pay those high prices, and the old investors really weren't too excited about big down rounds, but were also tired. They didn't have the reserves to put in. And those are the companies that I think have really, really struggled. New ideas, really great, fresh new ideas, no, it's not what it was, but you can still get those funded.
And tell me, we have a diverse audience here in terms of what they're looking for, some clinical stage, some preclinical stage. Can you, Huan, describe the different sources of funding that are available to people looking for money?
Of course. I think in terms of like translating academic discoveries into useful products, I think that at very early stage, there are actually a lot of funding opportunities at the tech transfer office at the universities, as well as from like FBIR grant from the NIH. Those can usually provide grants at the scale of from like a couple $100,000 to a few $1 million to help you like run some SAR, do some like preclinical efficacy models to generate some early stage proof of concept, so that you can like further develop your technology to a stage where you can attract further interest from institutional investors like Curie Bio or ADDF. And even for early stage companies, like usually during a seed in this environment, I think a lot of investors would prefer to at least like get to a development candidate at the end of the seed, and eventually for a Series A, you set up the company to like achieve some kind of clinical phase 1B or phase 2 clinical proof of concept. And at this stage, usually, of course, approaching like institutional investors, getting started to think about like how we build the right syndicate so that we have a group of investors that have the deep pocket to be able to continuously support the companies moving forward in Series A and Series B, but also it will be beneficial for like platform companies, for example, start to think about like what are the type of like non-dilutive money we can bring in from like pharma partners, so that we can maximize the value of the platform, and also at the same time being able to leverage larger amount of non-dilutive dollars to further develop the technology. I believe Stacy have built several of those companies that have been very successful in those type of strategies.
Yeah, no, we've done quite a few of the new technology platform company, and you really can bring in a lot of non-dilutive capital for certain targets that allow you to build the infrastructure of the company. The other thing that you mentioned was kind of, what does the seed get you to a development candidate, what you're hoping for in these small molecules? That is a place where I think it's hard to raise money right now. And we've just seen it over and over and over. And I think anyone who has invested in really early stage has been burned many times with I'm 18 months from a development candidate. Well, chemistry is chemistry, and you really don't know how far you are. And maybe you get lucky, or maybe 5 years later, you're still saying you're a year away from a development candidate. So there's just a lot of risk in that early stage chemistry when it's more of a single asset kind of a company, which is why I really like to do things bigger and lots of different things involved, whether it be a platform with lots of a new technology that can be applied across targets, or whether it's really working on multiple programs, because any one program, you might get lucky or you might not. And so there's that element that becomes very, very risky in terms of how long it will take you and how much money to get to that stage.
Ricardo, what would you say to the academic who is thinking of spinning out a company and really just doesn't know who to go to or how to do it?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of places to get advice. Certainly one of the things that I would recommend is that once you have a high-level idea of the concept for the company, that is to say what the technology is, what the indications are, what the targets are, you usually can get meetings with VCs to get advice. And in fact, the best way of actually getting funded is to get advice. Okay, so I would recommend, for example, we essentially take all comer applications and we review virtually all of them, and we give you feedback. We give you very detailed feedback about why we like it and why we don't like it, and what you might do to make it better. And occasionally, we will actually elevate it ourselves. And we'll say, okay, well, look, we love your technology. We just don't think this is quite the right indication, or we don't think that this is the right way of proceeding, or we think you should invest more in the platform, or we think you should invest less on the platform and more on the first drug embodiment. And we'll at least give you our perspective. And so that is very valuable, actually, because it helps you. First of all, you'll learn a ton, and then secondly, you'll be able to sharpen, make the company concept much crisper.
Do you think that we've seen a lot of mega rounds? Is it harder for right now for the early stage seed company to get funding? And are we going to see more of that where people are just investing at a less risky stage?
I think there have always been fewer seed investors than there are investors at the A round and at later rounds. It is a lot riskier. Usually, I should say though that you also invest less money, which means that you can take a much broader set of risks. So if you raise, a $200 or $300 million fund and you're investing, $10 million per company, you have 30 companies. So you have a lot, and you only need a few of them to succeed because the fund is relatively small. So all it really takes is, one or two good exits. We already, for example, had one good exit. It paid for not just that fund. I mean, it multiplied the fund just from this one thing. So I think it's always been difficult to, there have always been fewer people investing early, mostly because it takes longer, right? Because you don't really exit at the Series A, you exit after the Series A, and the more, of course, dilution rounds there are, the less well you do, and so the math doesn't always work out. But, I think if you have good execution and good science, so it's much harder to be a seed investor if you don't have a deep pool of expertise there. I guess maybe that's what I would say. You need to be an expert. You need to be able to help people. You need to be able to kind of participate in the companies and understand how they're going and really understand, what a development candidate really means. And you need to have some chemists who tell you, yeah, this is viable, this is not viable. It's not really possible to be a seed investor and just sit on a board.
And so, what is really the best way, Stacy, to access a VC? Like, so say somebody was interested in getting an investment. How do you start?
It's easy. Just like what Ricardo was saying, I'll just echo that. Ask for advice. And I really think that's the best way to get started. The bar for taking a first meeting is really low. We'll meet with almost anyone. We'll hear any story. We'll talk to almost anyone. And I do think that what Ricardo was saying is right. If you go into it saying, look, I'm thinking about, am I ready? Here's what I have. Can I get some advice from you? That can actually even lead to a more productive conversation that's helpful. If it happens to resonate with the VC and we love it and we think there's something exciting there, we're going to jump in. You don't have to ask us to jump in. Like, we're going to say, please, we want to be a part of this. But I think it does get you more feedback. I think if you come with what you think is a polished presentation and say, I'm pitching to you now, yes or no, you don't always get the same kind of dialogue, the same kind of feedback. And in some ways, the bar's a little higher. You might say, well, that's not really quite the right team, or they don't quite have it yet. And they don't seem to want our help. So, it's going to be too hard to get involved there. So I really do echo what you said, Ricardo. I think going in and asking for some advice and, hey, here's what I'm thinking, here's the story I have, can we chat about what might make sense? People will take that meeting and you'll get a chance to have at least a call.
Yeah, I want to second what Ricardo and Stacy just said. We really would love to be a thought partner of your entrepreneurship journey. And at DDF, we do have a good network of drug discovery veterans that have a lot of experience, particularly in drug discovery in the neurodegeneration space. And we also always try to be helpful and supportive and provide very specific feedbacks on what are the types of data we would like to see to be able to fund our opportunity.
Yeah, maybe I should add, we virtually never get a fully formed company that has all the pieces, basically. That just never happens. So we're always in the position of helping you do something, right? In some cases, we're providing you straightforward sort of back office stuff, the IP stuff and the lawyer and all that other stuff. In other cases, we're providing the people. Right, it might be that you don't want to join a company full time, too risky for you, right? You're a professor someplace. So we we provide all those pieces, and the earlier we engage, the better it is, because it's just more fun to eat a cake that you helped to bake, basically. So we like helping you bake the cake. But also because, we have ideas about, what we think will succeed, and, whether we're right or wrong, that is the idea of the partners. So therefore, you're more likely to succeed that way.
And in a lot of cases, the company we end up finding are companies we have been following and talking with for like multiple years. It's barely like a new relationship that's just started.
And it's something I really like about what Curie is doing as well. And I've said this for years, that there's almost an inverse relationship between the amount of money you put into a company and the amount of work it takes. And so when you're doing a seed stage company, that is so much work, because there's not usually the, well-established management team that knows what they're doing. There's a lot more that you do as a VC. And so then you're like, well, I put in this small amount of money, even if I hit a home run, it's not going to be a multiple of our fund. It's not going to really return things. And so you start to see these different priorities in terms of, well, this one takes more work, but it's going to be a smaller return. This one's less work, it's a bigger return, that's easier. But I think a model like Curie, where that's part of the model, is having the team around and sharing that infrastructure to help build these early seed companies, I think is exactly what a lot of really, really early, straight out of academia companies need. And so I think it's a great setup for that.
And I think there are a lot of VCs that have incubator-type programs and are really scouring academia to find the next good idea and willing to provide help to early-stage companies.
I should also say that, only a relatively small fraction of the applications we get come from academia. Almost all of them come from people who are already in biotech, who are your part of the industry has melted, but your idea is still a really good one, and you still really believe in your project, and we like you, basically. And we'll help get your drug embodiment to that next stage, and we'll even help you raise that Series A, and we have a Series A fund, so we'll invest in that maybe, right? So
as part of my job, I'm always looking for the neuro-curious VC who is going to invest in Alzheimer's, because I want to get as much money into Alzheimer's as possible. And so do you think with these new monoclonal antibodies and what seems like an enhanced interest by pharma in Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases, do you think that the VC community is going to start to participate more?
I don't think it's even necessarily fair to say start to participate more. I think the VC community has been there. When we started Denali, that was almost a decade ago now, and that was the largest Series A in biotech history at the time. Like, we pulled in a lot of VCs for that, and there were a lot of, there's been a lot of interest. When you look across at all the neuro companies and all the funding, I think you're hard-pressed to find the VC that's not interested in neuro. There are some, but I think for the past decade, there's been a huge interest in neuro. I think the biggest challenges are figuring out how we get our proof of concepts in more efficient ways. And I know there was some talk about that in the earlier panel that I came in at the tail end of. But we really have to figure out how to do much more efficient clinical trials to be able to get your proof of concept on less money. The idea that we have to go all the way to a phase 3 and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to figure out if we're going to be able, if our drug is going to affect disease at the right stage of disease that we can test it, that's what scares people off. But I think they've been there.
Yeah, I think I've for the 20 years I've been doing this, I've seen a lot of enthusiasm for neurodegeneration and usually less enthusiasm for psychiatry, actually. And I have to say, I recently have seen a lot of enthusiasm for neurodegeneration, at least in part because the trials are getting a little easier. I mean, I remember the horror of having to run a BACE inhibitor trial that was supposedly a phase 2, but it was a $400 million thing. That felt like a career-risking kind of event. Whereas, now, at least conceptually, you can look for things like reduction of tau 217 or phospho 217, or you can look at reductions of NFL. And while they're not 100% correlated with success, at least they indicate that your thing is moving in the right direction. And you can do that in comparatively small groups of people. So it's much more plausible to do a phase 2 proof of concept, whereas there was a time when there was no such thing. And in Parkinson's, I would say there's still no such thing. But in AD and in ALS and in other areas, it looks like maybe there is,
I think no VC would doubt that there is huge commercial opportunity in these neurodegenerative diseases. I think it's more about whether we can pave out an efficient and tractable path to demonstrate that clinical proof of concept with the resources that is reachable for small biotech companies. I think a lot of times for the companies that we are supporting, they are often developing a clinical path that nobody has really done before. They have to be the pioneer in developing the biomarker strategies very early on in their R&D strategies to be able to de-risk at early stage of clinical development, to show target engagement, to show that they are perturbing the human biology as they have predicted. And I think that to be able to look ahead, plan ahead, and think about developing some of those tools early on would be hugely beneficial. And as the company starts to move into phase 2 trial, ultimately need to run a trial of several hundred people to be able to show clinical benefit. And that stage, for sure, we will need to partner with a pharmaceutical company to be able to handle a clinical trial like that. So to maintain a good relationship, to understand the strategy of the pharmaceutical company, and to be able to build a data package that would get the pharmaceutical companies interested to secure that kind of partnership earlier on would also be critical.
And maybe you could talk, Stacy, about corporate VCs and working with them to partner in order to invest in companies.
Yeah, we partner with anyone. So we syndicate with all kinds of different investors, and corporate VCs, I think, there is no one type of, you've got your corporate VCs that are strategic, you have your corporate VCs that are not, that are just more independent from the company. So I think it really depends. And so I would say it depends on what you're looking to get out of it. If it's just another funding partner, that's one thing. If it's expertise in an area, that's another. If it's bringing someone in who might be an acquirer, that's yet another thing. So I think there are different considerations that one would make in terms of thinking about bringing in a corporate VC as well.
I think corporate VC has really played an important role in supporting these early stage innovation when a lot of institutional investors has become more selective in the past 2 years.
Yeah, and I think, these, as we've heard today, the trials for Alzheimer's, for example, are just so expensive. So I agree with what you said with regards to bringing in pharma, and I'm seeing a lot of interest by pharma now in getting involved, and we're seeing a lot of new targets away from amyloid and tau, and I think that will spark continued interest by the VC community.
But I think there's a difference if you're talking about funding the trial, a very expensive trial, and bringing in a pharma partner, as opposed to a pharma VC group. Your VC group is really, the funding is going to be pretty similar to any other VC. But if you really are looking at, how do I fund this phase 3 that's going to be outrageously expensive, that's when I think if you're looking in the Alzheimer's space, there's a lot of good reason to partner with pharma for those really big, expensive trials.
So one of the things that we do, actually, and it's sort of a service, but it's also helpful for our model, is we have developed relationships with, I would say, who we see as the decision makers at various large pharma and biotech. and we essentially ping them on, company ideas. And so we say, well, tell me, just give us a sense for, what kinds of things you're interested in investing. What does your pipeline look like? What would you need? What are the gaps? Because almost all of them understand that all the innovation can't come from them. And so it really de-risks our investment, but it also helps de-risk the company. And so we usually don't want an investment from them exactly because that actually caps the potential upside and the exits, but we do want their opinion. And we're looking for that. And to some extent, we also look at, Series A investors, because we understand that we're the early part of the ecosystem and we're looking at the next set of people. We want to know what the rest of the ecosystem needs.
Well, I think that in many ways, as we were saying, call a VC for advice. We VCs, or in biotech, call the pharma partners for advice all the time. And it's an ecosystem that it's a win-win. Those partners in pharma love to talk to us because they want to be the first phone call we make when we've got something really interesting and exciting. It's about relationships too. And so they will take the call, and I agree with Ricardo, we do that all the time. You're constantly trying to get feedback, understanding. The earlier you get it, the better you can build a company for something that someone else is going to be interested in.
Do you think the IPO markets is another way to go for these expensive trials, or is it just too much money that needs to be raised?
I mean, I think the IPO market is absolutely a way to go. I think that the IPO market, yes, it's been really tough the last couple of years, but it is, I think, opening again, and I think you'll be seeing a lot more IPOs, in the coming months to year. I still think there are certain trials where, and Alzheimer's is just one of those, that it's these phase 3s in Alzheimer's are very, very, very expensive and very high risk. And so getting the public investors to, really be able to, I think, understand that and fund it to the level that they need to be funded is still a little trickier in this field than in other fields.
Yeah.
In some cases, I would say.
So I ran a public company for a while, and I have to say that there are unexpected downsides of being a public company, and one of the main ones is that you're doing a lot of really risky things under the white-hot spotlight of people who have no patience. Mm-hmm. And you're forever meeting people who are, whatever they tell you, are short-term investors. And you're subject to all kinds of hedging strategies that are just not what happens if you're a private company. So I think an IPO is maybe the only way for certain companies. For example, for the company that I'm running now, I think we'll have to have an IPO because I don't know that there's anybody who's going to acquire an addiction company before we can show that it really makes a big difference and that it is dramatically better than everything else and that we're not just substituting one opiate for another or doing something stupid like that, right? And that requires convincing a lot of people. But I know also that then it's a public company doing those studies, little tiny things are going to be interpreted as giant downsides. And the ratchet goes downward, it doesn't go upward, right? So.
Yeah, I think in 20 and 21, a lot of companies went public that probably shouldn't have gone public, and they're really suffering for it now and trading below $1, and you see a lot of that. So I think that the new crop of companies that are going to go public are going to be better companies who are further along from a clinical perspective. And I think if those companies trade well, we'll see the opening of the IPO market. So I think we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to do just a quick lightning round, and then we'll turn it over to questions. So tell me, each of you, one thing that excites you the most about neurodegenerative disease funding, and what keeps you up at night?
I think the emerging novel technologies about getting drugs into the brain are very exciting, particularly like the BBB shuttles. We already saw that with transferring shuttle, we can dramatically reduce the dose we needed for amyloid therapeutics and also makes the drug extremely much more safe. I think there would be more opportunities like in the coming years we can see to deliver additional modalities such as oligonucleotide into the brain, which allow us to unlock many more targets. I think that would be very exciting. And in terms of neurodegenerative targets, I always feel that there are so much like peripheral liabilities of a lot of targets we are interested in pursuing. I think if there's any way we can like enhance the therapeutic window specifically for the brain, those will be transformative as well.
Yeah, that was such a good answer. That was going to be my answer. Yeah, I mean, getting biologics and sort of gene therapies broadly into the brain, I think is unbelievably exciting for all kinds of things. I mean, there's transferrin, which is kind of the old technology, but then there are, CD98H and, whatever, all these things that bind to the AAVs that get them across the blood-brain barrier. Those are very exciting. But given that you already gave that answer, I'm going to give another answer, which is actually the new set of biomarkers. The new set of
giving my answer.
There's only like 2 answers. I'm sorry. No, the new set of biomarkers, which I think has the potential to allow us to do just much faster proof of concept and smaller proof of concept studies. I mean, I now see people doing like studies in like 20 or 30 people and actually believing them. I mean, there used to be a time when if you did you showed up with some sort of a proof of concept study in 30 patients. People, and for neurodegenerative disease, people would think you were stupid. And now, with NFL and tau and all these other things, it looks pretty good. And now, changes in splicing associated with TDP43, all those are looking pretty exciting.
Yeah, biomarkers are everything. I mean, I think biomarkers are what get me the most excited that we're actually going to be able to do effective, efficient clinical trials in the right patients at the right time. I think if I had to say another thing that I got excited about, because that one was taken, I do think understanding the genetics of resilience and protective factors is opening up a lot of new targets and new ideas for ways that we can treat the disease. I think what keeps me up at night is that we might have a really great target and we're able to hit it with the right modality and get it into the brain and we've got the right biomarkers and we can do all of that, but maybe we need to hit it 30 years before symptoms. How are we going to be able to affect a disease that's been going on for decades in the time frame that will allow us to do an efficient and effective clinical trial and be able to see that we can affect disease? So that's what keeps me up at night.
Great. Well, why don't we turn it over for questions? No questions.
So if you have questions, you can come to where the microphone is. Thank you.
Catherine Cahill, Neurochemistry Lab, Mass General. And we've been working on alpha-synuclein for several years now. And we've developed a panel of small molecules. And I guess my interest in it, as well as the small molecule aspect of it and where it's targeting and the iron response element, is there are multiple alpha-synuclein transcripts. And how would you view specific transcripts as biomarkers for Parkinson's disease?
Well, I think Parkinson's disease is...
Or LBD, or MSA, or any other synuclein.
We have a lot of work to do on biomarkers for Parkinson's.
Right.
So whereas I think we have made huge progress in Alzheimer's disease biomarkers and other tauopathies, Parkinson's disease, there is the seeding assay now, which is quite exciting, but not really all that practical for doing, and it's not quantitative. It's yes, no. So I don't have a good answer yet for what the biomarker for synuclein would be. I think the seeding assay gives the first step.
Is it for Alzheimer's disease? How do you see its relevance in Alzheimer's disease? Given that the amyloid plaque is sort of You know, part of it is you know, alpha-synuclein. It was the first protein discovered in the amyloid plaque, and yet we haven't even mentioned it today, which is really weird.
Well, I do think that we haven't really talked that much about specifics of any proteins, but
Amyloid and tau have been kind of, and ApoE4 have been.
oh, sorry, not on our. I wasn't here earlier,
Oh,
so I
you
missed
weren't
that. So I think that mixed pathology is the norm, not the exception.
Of course, yeah.
And so trying to understand, is the mixed pathology because these diseases are relatively common with aging, and therefore it's not uncommon to have more than one disease? Is it that whatever predisposes you to mishandle one protein predisposes you to mishandle other proteins? Is it that once you start mishandling one protein and your cells start to become sick, then you start mishandling a lot of other proteins? And it's probably a little of all of the above, and I don't think we understand yet. What we do know is that there are lots of different subsets of disease that you can look at based on different pathologies and co-pathologies, and how we approach those, how we think of those from biomarkers, how we think of them from therapeutic development could be very different.
I think for alpha-synuclein, we would really love to have an assay that is quantitative. Right now, assay is not quantitative yet. It would be great to have an assay that we can use to show like response to a therapeutic intervention, for example. If there are specific isoforms of alpha-synuclein that you discover are more directly pathogenic, for example, and you are able to measure that from the CSF, I think it would be very cool.
Thank you.
Hi, just a question, acknowledging that, you know, for these large trials that are very expensive, where they would require typically partnering with a pharma and to do a phase 3. With that in mind, how do you view from your positions whether, you know, genetic segmentation early on in the disease as a plan is really just, you know, going to make things more difficult down the road from a partnering standpoint, because many pharma want to go after blockbusters to whatever replace their, you know, revenues from Humira, whether it's AbbVie or what have you. Is precision Alzheimer's really a thing that, you know, you think will move the pharma partners to get intrigued from the early stage? Just
Well,
curious.
I mean, so I used to run neuroscience at Novartis, okay? And Novartis was all about blockbusters, and it needed to replace Gleevec, and it needed to replace Entresto, and all these other things. However, it also needed stuff that worked, right? So if stuff doesn't work, then there's no replacing anything. And I think most large pharma understand that you need to do the study in the patients that need it when they need it. So for example, you know, making the pitch that you need to do a study in, I don't know, ApoE4 homozygotes or heterozygotes isn't such a difficult pitch, especially now that that's an available population. Now, if, on the other hand, somebody would show up and tell me, well, I need to find this really, really obscure population, then I would usually have to go out and figure out whether that was an obtainable population. And usually the answer was, it's going to cost me, I don't know, $700,000 or something for every patient I identify, in which case the answer is no. So I think if you think it through pretty carefully, yes, segmentation makes a lot of sense. When the segmentation gets esoteric, then it makes no sense.
Right, because there may be hidden costs with finding those.
It's a combination of finding it, just being able to execute the trial for a reasonable cost and a reasonable amount of time. And, you know, then there's also the fact that if that population, I mean, if you give the population too many haircuts, then the MPV gets pretty crummy, and then nobody wants it. So, you know, that's kind of what you're trying to balance.
Yeah, all that said, I also do think that a futuristic, we're not there yet, but when we start talking about the biomarkers, I get excited about being able to segment these populations based on the underlying biology that may not be apparent in the genetics, but is in the biomarkers. So, you know, just like, you know, Alzheimer's is not Alzheimer's is not Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's is not Parkinson's is not Parkinson's. I think Parkinson's is a great example of, you know, is your Parkinson's more mitochondrial driven or endolysosomal driven. And it may be that if we could identify the underlying biology, then when we're developing these new therapeutics that are targeting mitochondria or the endolysosomal system, we can then enroll the right patients that have the biology that we're trying to treat. So again, we're not there yet, but that is where I hope that we get to and where I think the biomarkers will help us.
That would be great. And if you could make a case for surrogacy, even better, right? With those biomarkers and those subpopulations.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Thanks. I guess looking through the day and hearing about the great advancements we made in this space, but then listening to your panel about the funding and how difficult it is to fund these early companies, I see sort of like there's a sort of a gap, like especially in neurodegeneration, how I can bridge that gap to a value inflection point to raise money on, or to raise more first money or later Series A or B money on. Is there something you can give us as a guidance? Would you be looking for as an investor as sort of a meaningful inflection point and over what time frame if somebody wanted to start a company in the neurodegenerative space?
I can give you my view as a kind of seed investor, which is that we're looking for things that are around which we can raise a Series A, and then after that Series A, that's the last round. So we're looking for something we can exit at the end of a Series A. That's really the ideal investment. And so if you go backwards from that, that means that by the end of the seed investment, which might be, let's say, $10 million, you need to have a genuine, honest-to-goodness development candidate that may or may not have gone through GLP talks, but it looks like it will, right? Or at least a series of things it could. That's sort of how we define. And then when it comes to, then if you sort of think about what it takes to exit after a Series A, you have to have some kind of a clinical proof of concept, which for neurodegeneration really means some sort of a biomarker effect, right? That's kind of how we think about it. Other things, of course, we prefer targets that are somehow validated in man, either genetically or because, somebody accidentally found that there's some drug that makes people better, right? We prefer things where the execution risk is reasonable, i.e., we think you can make it in a reasonable period of time, either because it's a small molecule. I mean, if you have to start with a giant screen, we're not that enthusiastic. If, on the other hand, there is a giant screen and there are already some hits, that's a more reasonable thing for a seed investment, not viable for a later investment. If it's a biologic, it's somewhat de-risked. So, 4 areas of risk: target, technical sort of execution risk, the clinical risk, and then the exit risk, which is essentially we want to make sure that it's something that either Series A investors or alternatively pharma would be interested in.